Anyway, we are in Acts chapter 12. We are ready to begin our look at the second martyrdom that we read of in the book of Acts officially. There were others before that, because we know Saul of Tarsus dragged people into jail. But we read of Stephen in chapter 7 and 8, and now we're ready for the first apostle to die for the cause of Christ. And so let's read verses 1 through 5. Since I skipped Bill on Sunday, we'll start with Bill, and then we'll go to Henry and around. Bill and I knew what happened as soon as I saw the video. And I'm like, I skipped Bill. So we'll start with Bill. One verse each through verse 5.
Now about that time Herod the king laid hands on some who belonged to the church in order to mistreat them.
Then he killed James, the brother of John, with a sword.
And when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This was during the days of unleavened bread.
So when he had arrested him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 squads of soldiers to keep him, intending to bring him before the people after Passover.
So Peter was kept in the prison, but prayer for him was being made fervently by the church to God.
So, Herod began to persecute the church. And we know about what time this is. This Herod, because of what we're going to find later on in the chapter, this is not the Herod that we read of at the end of the Gospels. This is a new Herod. This Herod Agrippa the First. Now, this is not even going to be the same Herod, because we know what's going to happen to this Herod later on. It's not going to be the Agrippa we read of later. This Herod Agrippa the First, it started reigning in about 40 AD. So, and died at 44 AD. So if what's going to happen in this chapter is fairly close together, that means that this is about 11 years from Pentecost in Acts chapter 12. If he died in 44 AD and Jesus died in 33 AD, so we're 10 to 11 years later. Again, if we don't follow the years, we might think this all happened around the same time. It didn't. And the reason why we know this Herod is not the Herod that is in the Gospels is because of how he died. And we'll get to that a little later. I don't want to take up the rest of the chapter discussing it now. But Herod begins to persecute the church. Who did he kill? Which James? Because there were 2 apostles named James. Which one? The brother of John. James, son of Zebedee, the brother of John. And if we remember, Jesus prophesied this. James and John came to Jesus, remember, late in his ministry and said, "We can suffer for you. We can go and die for you." And Jesus said, "You don't know what you're asking for." He said, "Yes, we can." So in Matthew chapter 20, Henry, why don't you get Matthew 20, verses 20 to 23. Well, it is a slightly different account. But anyway, this is Matthew 20, verses 20 to 23.
Then the mother of Zebedee's son came to him with her sons, knelt him down and asked him something from him. And he said to her, "What do you wish?" She said to him, Grant that these 2 sons of mine may sit, one on your right hand and the other on the left in your kingdom. Jesus answered and said, "You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink, and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" He said to him, "We are able."
Verse 23.
So he said to them, "You will indeed drink my cup and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with, but to sit on my right hand or on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom is prepared by my Father."
So again, we had the mother of James and John, she wanted her sons to have a very good place of preeminence, sitting on the right and left hand of Jesus. And he said, you don't know what you ask for. And he said, are you able to drink of the cup that I am going to drink of, and be baptized with the baptism I'm going to be baptized with? Again, that's figures of speech. I'm going to suffer and die. Are you able to do that? And he said, yeah, we're able to do that. It's very quick and easy to say that, much tougher to do. And he said, well, you will indeed do this, but I can't give away what is not mine to give. Sitting on the right hand and the left, that was not Jesus' to give. But he said, you will indeed suffer and die. Now we know John survived a lot longer than James, but he did suffer the same way, but not when James did. Jesus prophesied this. And back in Acts 12, the Jews were pleased at James's execution, which starts to make more sense when we think about the passage of time. If 11 or 12 years have passed, that means that James is not an unknown figure in Jerusalem and in Judea. Peter is not an unknown figure. He's going to be in jail. And they had been preaching, they had been teaching, probably had gotten themselves into trouble with the Pharisees many times. And Herod, he's wanting to persecute the church, or at least at this time. And so he grabbed James and killed him. And this is one of those stories that teach us that bad things can happen to good people. James didn't deserve to die. He had not done anything wrong. He did not suffer as a murderer or as a thief or as some other criminal. He suffered as a Christian. Bad things, though, can happen to good people. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 11. Naomi can get verses 35 through 38. This is the chapter of faith. But notice about how this chapter ends.
Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth.
You might ask, who are these people? These are some of the people that the Hebrew writer said had faith that he could not mention. For time's sake, he couldn't mention. Doesn't sound like these people had good lives or easy lives, but they had faithful lives. And verse 39, and these all having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise, God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. Even the people in Hebrews 11 didn't receive the promise. They died before Christ died on the cross. They died before then, but they had faith. They had their faith to the end. They received a good report through faith. But notice their lives weren't easygoing lives. They were hard. And bad things can happen to good people. James's death was, we might say, a tragedy. He's an apostle. Think about all the good things he could have done. But sometimes our lives are cut short. And we mustn't mourn for James because he was a man of faith. He went on to a better place. He didn't have to suffer anymore. That's hard for the people at that time. When you go to someone who's grieving, you say, oh, they're in a better place. Sometimes people say, well, that may be true, but it doesn't help those who are grieving now. Because for them, they're missing. But James wasn't suffering anymore. And as a Christian, we don't mourn in death the same way that the world mourns in death. We mourn for ourselves that we don't have the opportunity to be with whoever has died. But we shouldn't mourn for them if they're in Christ. because there's nothing for us to mourn about for them, because Christ has promised them a reward. Mourning for us, yes, that's always sad. Losing a loved one is tough, because we won't talk to them anymore, we won't see them anymore, and that's tough for us. But in James's case, it was better for him. Herod, not having enough, was he killed James, and then he arrested Peter. At what time of the year was this? It was the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But he didn't kill James during the Passover. Peter, during the Passover. He killed James seemingly immediately. But he didn't kill Peter during the Passover. And the King James Version, I was going to interrupt, but it wasn't quick enough for it. Tammy's version correctly translated Passover in verse, I think it was verse 4 or 5, instead of Easter. King James Version is the only version that translates that as Easter. And Easter is not found in the Bible. This was not the Catholic Easter service that Herod waited for. You think about it, Herod wasn't a Christian. Why would he care if he waited for the Christian Easter to pass to kill Peter? Now he would care, since he was Jewish, about Passover. And this was the Passover time. And just like the Pharisees didn't want Jesus hanging on the cross for the Sabbath, it's funny what people want to care about. I'm going to kill you, but I'm going to wait for my religious holiday to be done first. No. It was wrong. It was wrong to kill, yes, over the religious holiday, but it was wrong to kill in the first place. Peter hadn't done anything worthy of death. Herod was waiting until after Passover, a Jewish feast, to execute Peter. What was the church doing? Seeing how Peter wasn't immediately executed, maybe like James was, what was the church doing in the meantime?
Praying?
They were praying for Peter. 1 John chapter 3, I think we're to Tammy. 1 John 3, verse 22.
And whatever we ask, we receive from him, because we keep his commandments and do those things that are pleasing in his sight.
A lot of people will misuse this verse and think that if we're faithful to God, we'll get whatever we ask for. And they'll point to this verse, maybe think, and whatsoever you ask, we receive of him. Well, we know it's according to his word and according to his will. We have to ask according to his will. He's not a genie who grants us whatever we want. But he does command us to pray, and remember that what we are blessed with, we ask it of him, and we are blessed of him. We are blessed because we keep his commandments. And God hears the prayers of the righteous. He doesn't promise to hear the prayers of those who are not his children. I'm not saying he never hears their prayers, but he has not promised to hear their prayers like he has the Christians. And in the outline I comment, did they pray so earnestly for James? We don't know. Maybe it happened so fast that they didn't have the opportunity. But maybe they didn't pray. Had their faith been rekindled to pray for Peter? Or had James been executed in spite of the fact that they prayed? We don't know the answer to that, and I'm not trying to insinuate anything of the Christians in Acts chapter 5. But we read that they did pray for Peter, and they prayed so earnestly they didn't want to lose two apostles, because James would have been a very important apostle. Think of the three most outspoken apostles: Peter, James, and John. Who knows if they were one of the few apostles who were still in Judea? We don't read of the other apostles ever after Acts chapter 1 and Acts chapter 2. The gospel had to go out into all the world. So that would have meant Matthias and Matthew and Bartholomew and all of the other apostles would have had to go. We think of them all being camped out in Jerusalem. That's not what Jesus told them to do. Go ye out into all the world and preach the gospel. But if Peter, James, and John were in the Judea region and you lost one of them, it's hard to lose two. They really didn't want to lose Peter. And so they were earnestly praying for him that God would hear their prayers. So let's get more of the story to see what God did. In Acts chapter 12, verses 6 through 11, we'll start with Bill, and we'll go one verse each through verse 11.
On the very night when Herod was about to bring him forward, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and guards in front of the door were watching over the prison.
Now behold, an angel of the Lord stood by him, and a light shone in the prison, and struck Peter on the side and raised him up, saying, Arise quickly, and his chains fell off his neck.
And the angel said to him, Dress yourself and put on your sandals. And he did so. And he said to him, Wrap your cloak around you and follow me.
So he went out and followed him and did not know that what was done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision.
When they had passed the first and the second guard, they came to the iron gate that leads into the city, which opened for them by itself. And they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel departed from them.
When Peter had come to his cell, he said, Now I know for sure that the Lord has sent his hand, and has delivered me from the hand of the Herod, with all the expectation of the Jewish people.
This is a story of Peter being delivered from prison. How tightly was Peter being held? Pretty tight. They buried Jesus. Well, they didn't, but Joseph of Arimathea buried Jesus, and they put a guard out in front of the tomb, and that wasn't enough. The body disappeared because Jesus rose again. They made sure that Peter wasn't going anywhere. They had him chained up, sleeping between not one, but two soldiers. He was bound with two chains, and they even had keepers before the door that kept the prison. He was in there pretty tight. If you wanted to get him out, you're going to have to get in there. You're going to have to get past all those guards. You're then going to have to get in and get the guards that are next to Peter, and then you're going to have to get him out. And that's not going to happen. Well, nothing's impossible with God. He sent his angel. And Peter originally didn't know that this was an angel. He thought he was seeing a vision. Peter did see visions in the past, and those visions seemed very real as far as if they were happening to him, and they weren't a vision. So it was night. It was the middle of the night. You would think, well, maybe it's a vision. And the angel let him out, and let him out of the prison, brought him into the city, and then left. And Peter said, it's not a vision. This actually happened. And he did it without the guards knowing. The angel was able to do what men could not do. And Peter was delivered by faith. Peter's faith and the faith of those who prayed. They were asking that Peter be released. God answered their prayers. Naomi, you want to get Hebrews 11, verses 28 through 34.
By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. By faith the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who had been disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies.
34 through 34.
And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and of Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight.
So, all of this faith seemingly did miraculous things. Crossing the Red Sea. on dry land. Can't be done by faith. It was done. The Passover, like as far as through faith, the children of Israel were released after God passed over all of their houses, killed the firstborn of the Egyptian houses. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell. If they hadn't marched around the city and followed God's instructions, the walls would not have fallen. By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish because she did what she was supposed to do, and so on and so on and so on. By faith, Peter was released from prison. Seemingly impossible, but done through the power of God. Anything before we move on? Well, if not, let's get verses 12 through 19, and this is the rest of that story. So 12 through 19, we'll start with Tammy and go around. Why don't we do 2 verses each this time?
So when he had considered this, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. And as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a girl named Rhoda came to answer.
When she recognized Peter's voice, because of her joy, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter was standing in front of the gate. They said to her, "You are out of your mind." But she kept insisting out of the soul. They kept saying, "It is an angel."
Now Peter continued knocking, and when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. But mentioning to them with his hand to keep silent, he declared to them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, "Go, tell these things to James and to the classroom." And he departed and went to another place.
Now when day came, there was no little disturbance among the soldiers over what had become of Peter. And after Herod searched for him and did not find him, he examined the sentries and ordered that they should be put to death. Then he went down from Judea to Caesarea and spent time there.
So Peter goes to where the brethren would be meeting. This was night. They were praying, but they were together. It's interesting that the Christians were together. We need to find time to be together with Christians. We see so little of each other, and it's important that we gather together to study, to pray, to just be around each other sometimes. But they were there. Whose house were they at? According to verse 12.
Mary, the mother of John Mark.
Mary, the mother of John Mark. Mother Mary. We have so many Marys in the Bible. We have Mary, the mother of Jesus. We have Mary Magdalene. We have Mary and Martha. And now we have seemingly this other Mary. Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark. This is an important man. He's a very young man right here. He is going to be John Mark. Sometimes he's referred to just as Mark or Marcus by Paul. We're going to see him again in this book. He's going to be the reason for some trouble later on in this book between Paul and Barnabas. But he is going to be the eventual writer of the book of Mark. But he's a very young man here. And but he was a disciple. He was one of the disciples of Jesus, or afterwards at least. Not one of the apostles, but there were many other disciples. And they were all at Mary's house. And Peter gets there, and what happened when Peter knocked at the door? You ever had someone knock on your door and you don't open it for them? You knock at the door, "Who is it?" And you say your name, and then they run back if it's a kid, and then say, "Flo, someone's here." Well, that's what Peter did. He knocked on the door. Rhoda here knew it was Peter. Didn't open the door right away. She went and ran in, told that Peter's at the door. And I said, "You're crazy. He's not at the door. He's in jail." She said, No. You got to come see. He's at the door. He's at the door. And they said, "Well, no, it's his angel." But Peter continued knocking, and then they opened the door, and they were astonished. Because after all, he was in jail. Herod kept him pretty tight. And he told their peace. He declared what the Lord had done. And he says, go tell James. Now, this isn't the James that was just killed, because he's dead. This is another James. Could have been James the Less, an apostle. Could have been James, the Lord's brother, as we're probably going to find that who he is in Acts 15. But it's another James. And he said, go tell them that I'm out of jail. And the next part of the story is not a funny part, but it's just the end of the story. What happened to Herod? Well, what happened? What did Herod do at the end of the story?
The guards killed.
Yeah, the guards killed. I can't imagine what it was like to be those guards, to wake up and to find Peter's gone. And this is exactly what happened. They would have been the same attitude that the guards who were in front of Jesus' tomb would have had when Jesus was gone. They would have been killed. Or at least that's what should have happened. Well, it did here. You lose a prisoner, you die. And that's what's going to happen here, and that's what did happen here. And so Herod then went down from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there a while. We're at about 12 years after Pentecost, the day of Pentecost from Acts 2. 10 chapters, 12 years. And we've seen a lot of growth in the church. We've seen the church spread out. And I would come along and say, well, Paul is teaching off in the background. He's not here in Jerusalem. Paul's not there. But he's certainly teaching in other places. And we're about to find him. At the rest, at the end of this chapter. But we'll see if we can get 20 through 23. And this would describe what happens to Herod. We are to who? Whose turn? Tammy's? Why don't we read 20 through 23, one verse each?
Now Herod had been very angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, but they came to him with one accord, and having made Blastus the king's personal aide their friend, they asked for peace, because their country was supplied with food by the king's country.
On an appointed day, Herod, having put on his royal apparel, took his seat on the rostrum and began delivering an address to them.
And the people kept shouting, the voice of God, and not of man.
Immediately the angel of the Lord struck him down, because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and breathed his last.
So, this is not a good end for Herod. He died. Now, he wasn't planning to die. He went from Judea to Caesarea, same place that Cornelius was. It's on the coast. It's where like, as far as it's just like everywhere. You get coastal cities. It's where people tend to live. Especially richer people tend to live. It was a way to get out of Israel. If you wanted to go on a trip someplace else, you got to go to these coastal cities. Well, there was a place for Herod in Caesarea. And Herod was, it says, highly displeased with them of Tyre and Sidon, which are also on the coasts. But they came to him and they made his chamberlain their best friend, and they wanted to make peace, because their country was supplied by Herod. In other words, they didn't want a war. They didn't want Herod to be angry with them, because that could affect their livelihood. And so, on a day when Herod he got dressed up, he went and sat on the throne, he talked with them, and I said, this is the voice of a God, not of a man. What could Herod have done? Corrected them. Remember, that's what Peter did in Acts 10, verses 25 and 26. That's what Paul, will read of, does in Acts 14 when they make Barnabas and Saul gods. He says, no, I am not a god. Both of those times he could have corrected them. We can't help what other people say, but we can correct them when they're wrong. So in other words, Herod couldn't help that these people called him a god. But he didn't have to accept it. But he did. And it says, immediately the angel of the Lord smote him, because he gave not God the glory. And he was eaten of worms and gave up the ghost. Now you read Josephus, which is the writer of the secular writer of the Jewish history of that time. The story goes very similar. Only, like as far as he doesn't call it an angel of the Lord. The way he describes it is Herod was sitting there, and it tells the story exactly the same. And he looks up and he sees, I think I heard it was like a black bird or whatever, it was like a raven. And he got scared. He said that was the sign of death that was come to him. And 5 days later he died. A very painful death. And it was some intestinal problem that they had. Well, the Bible says he was eaten of worms. We do sometimes get the picture from this, especially from verse 23, that he died right there. No, he was smitten right there. It took him 5 days to die, but it was a very painful death. The angel of the Lord smote him right there, and he wasn't going to survive with that. It came on all of a sudden. People couldn't explain what happened, because he wasn't showing any signs of it before. But it's a very similar story that Josephus tells. Herod dies. This is Herod Agrippa I, who died in 44 AD. And so that's how we know we can date Acts chapter 12 to about 10, 11 years after Jesus' crucifixion. So we'll get the last two verses. I'll read them for time's sake. That will get us to chapter 13 for next week. But the word of God grew and multiplied. Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had fulfilled their ministry, and took with them John, whose surname was Mark. So Paul and Barnabas, remember, they had come to Jerusalem at one point to deliver relief. That was at the end of chapter, 10? No, 11. That was at the end of chapter 11. Paul and Barnabas were, at one point, they left Jerusalem. And when they left Jerusalem, they took John Mark with them. But notice the growth of the gospel. It multiplied. They didn't just add a person here, a person there. No, multiplied. The persecution didn't stop it. Whether it was Herod's persecution, whether it was the Jews' persecution, it just didn't stop it. And so Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem, where they had taken relief for the saints, and they took John Mark, because they were going to be traveling. They were going to be spreading the gospel even further. And so that will bring us to the end of chapter 12. Next week, the Lord willing, I do have maps now. And I have free maps that are able to be posted online. And I had to sort of make my own markings on the map. The nice maps that you get usually in the back of your Bibles or online, those are all copywritten. And so I can't post them in addition to our video if they're copywritten, because I don't have the rights to them. But you can find free maps and make your own parts on it, and they work just as well. And so I will have them, the Lord willing, next week to go along with our notes for Acts 13.